Mrs. Gray by Riley Vanderlip. It was nearing Christmas, and everyone in my university was packing up to go home for a few weeks to spend the holidays with their families. I was doing the same. I go to school in Peterborough, Ontario. I love it there. It was peaceful, it sat on a river, and there was abundance of nature. It reminded me of my home, Rose Creek. Technically, I lived in a place called Orford Township. However, a little while before I was born, the province had made all the townships amalgamate. No point in having hundreds, maybe thousands of little towns scattered across the province by their own laws, police forces, etc. So, for practically all small townships across the province merged into bigger municipalities. And of all the surrounding townships in my area, including Orford, merged into one big place known as Rose Creek. I had my own car, so once I had everything I need for my 2-week break off, I drove. I smugly cackled to myself as I drove by the masses of university students waiting at the bus station. Sucks for them. I had a long drive ahead of me, about 4 hours if I did stop for gas and food. Because of the long drive, I rarely went home, and only visited family on occasions, such as Christmas. I was excited to see them. I hadn't seen them since I left for my senior year back in September. Mom was probably already prepping for our big Christmas family reunion, while my father was probably busy working on his model car in the garage. My older sister, Melanie, was scheduled to come home from her job in the United States today as well. We'd probably be getting home around the same time. The drive home wasn't bad at all. I was surprised since I left during rush hour. The sun started to set as I drove past a big, beat-up sign that read, "Welcome to Rose Creek." I drove for about 10 more minutes until I entered my township, and an even more beat-up sign that read, "Orford," greeted me. I drove slowly through the sleepy town. Not a single soul was outside. I wasn't surprised. The entire town probably had about 300 people in it, and about 90% of them went all past the age of 60. To get to my house, I had to pass my old school, Orford Elementary School, or OES, for short. When I drove by, I saw a class of children playing in the front yard, with a middle-aged looking woman, presumably the teacher, standing with her arms crossed, watching them. That was odd, I remember thinking to myself. It was pretty late for school to still be in session. The teacher started waving at me as I passed, and all the kids quickly followed. I smiled, and waved back, and then kept on driving. I was surprised the school hadn't been shut down yet. I had heard talks of closing shortly before I left for university. The school was dying. Not that many kids left to attend it, but I was happy to find out it was still alive and well. I finally pulled into my driveway, and my parents and my sister were all at the door to greet me. It was a nice feeling. The entire evening was full of smiles, and best of all, dad jokes. Mom had a great dinner prepared for everyone. She even got my dad out of the garage for a few hours to help. We all sat around the dinner table and caught up with each other. I talked about my university life, which was going well for me. Then my father asked how good the drive home was. It was good, actually, I spoke. It's nice to be back. I see Orford hasn't changed much. It hasn't changed in the past 20 years, my father joked. Even the school, I said cheerfully. Old OES is still open, I see. There was a brief silence at the table, and my mother and father exchanged confused looks. OES? My mother said. That school closed for almost 4 years ago, right after you left for university. That's odd, I said. I saw a class of students playing outside on my drive home. Huh, my father said. Maybe there's still a daycare operating around the area or something. Not that there are many children left in Orford. We dropped the topic after that, and I pretty much forgot about the entire ordeal for the rest of the break. Christmas came around, and we all exchanged gifts for each other. I spent my Christmas break kicking back and catching up on some of my textbook readings. I wish that was all I could say about my break, but just a few nights before I was scheduled to go back to Peterborough, my old childhood friend Zach invited me to a house party. All of my old high school friends were supposed to be there. I guess it was supposed to be one last get-together before we all head back out and into our own lives. I decided to go. There's no harm in catching up with a few old friends, although I didn't care much for them. I tossed a few beers in my trunk and drove off to the house party. The house was on the other side of town, and I had to pass the school to get there. Like I said, I pretty much had forgotten all about seeing the kids at school, but as I drove by it the second time, I was forced to remember it all again. It was dark, and it was just a little bit past 10 at night, but I slowed down by the school, and I saw the class again. Since it was dark, it was difficult to make them out, but I knew I saw the silhouettes of children playing in the front yard. with the silhouette of an adult woman standing idly, watching them with her arms folded. The silhouettes of children stopped playing, and they all turned to wave at me. This time it freaked me out. This wasn't right. It was far too late for kids to be playing outside, and even if the school wasn't closed, these certainly weren't school hours. Again, though, I forced it into my head, and I sped up, leaving the school behind me. The party wasn't anything special. I was greeted by a few of my old high school friends, and we got to drinking. I managed to get myself a bit buzzed, but I couldn't stop thinking about the school, and it kind of ruined my night for me. I must have been showing my unease, since Zach came up to me during the party. "Hey pal, what you thinking about? Everything good?" he asked. Yeah, everything's good, man." I smiled. I was afraid that if I told Zach about it, he'd think I was stupid. It's not even that big of a deal. Everybody else would just fixate on different things. I knew it was best to just shove it out of my mind, but I've always been such a curious person, which is probably what led me into studying astronomy at my university. Something about the unknown fascinates me and unnerves me at the same time. I'm not a let-it-be kind of guy. I always strive to solve things I come across. I just don't like leaving things without an explanation. "Whoa, guys," one of the guys shouted out, looking out the window. "A snowstorm is really picking up out there." Everyone gathered around the window to see, me included. I swore under my breath as I could barely see 2 feet in front of me through the window. I was planning on driving home buzzed, which wasn't a good idea in and of itself, but now it was going to be made even more difficult by the storm. I told myself it would be fine. My house is less than 10 minutes from the party. I know the area well. I grew up here after all. When 1 o'clock rolled around, I decided it would be a good time to leave. The party was still going on, but I wasn't in the best mood. I said my goodbyes to everybody. Zach asked me to stay a bit longer, but I told him I was feeling unwell. I probably looked like the lamest guy there, but I wasn't too worried about that. I walked outside, climbed into my car, started it up, and carefully pulled out of the driveway before being careful not to get the car stuck in some snow along the way. Once I was on the road, I felt a lot better. I turned the radio on and let my head beat clear. I managed to drive pretty well after 4 beers, and I was looking forward to just getting home so I could go to sleep. I thought about taking the long way to avoid the school, but for some reason, I just had to go by the school again. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was my overly curious personality. I turned onto the street where OES was, and the storm somehow felt worse on this street. It was probably just my anxieties working it up to be worse, but I remember how difficult the drive through was on that one street. As I passed by the school, I turned my head and looked. Nothing. I was expecting to see kids there, but maybe they weren't anymore. I was almost surprised, and I should have felt relieved that they weren't there anymore. But honestly, I felt worse. Just as I was in front of the school, my car started sputtering. "Shit! No, no, no!" I slammed the wheel, but it was no good. The car completely died, and it slowly crawled to a stop, right in front of the school. The snowstorm continued, and the dimly lit street post did little to illuminate my surroundings. I pulled out my phone to call my parents, but then stopped before I hit the call button. Home was only a few minutes' walk away, and it'd be stupid to call for help now. I'm 21 years old. I can handle a situation like this on my own. I would get out of the car, push it off to the side of the road, walk home, and get in the morning. I opened the car door as snow and wind blasted inside. It was freezing cold outside. My face felt as if the wind was biting at it. I walked behind my car and got ready to push, but before I could do something forced me to look over at the school. When I did, I saw a little girl standing by the edge of the property, right under the streetlight. The conditions made it more difficult to make out the shapes of her, the details. She was simply a silhouette that made the shape of a little girl, and she was just staring at me. "Hello?" I asked. "Are you lost?" The little girl instantly turned around and started running back towards the school. Everything in me wanted me to just get back in the car, lock it, and call for help. But my curiosity overtook my better judgment, like it usually did. I started walking towards my old school, looking for where the little girl went. The snow was piling up now, and it was becoming difficult to walk. The first thing I noticed that was when I got close to the school was how unkind time was to it. The school was definitely closed. Now that I got closer to see for myself, there was no way the school was still in operation. The letters were rusted, some had fallen off. Some of the playground equipment now resembled torture devices more than they did playground equipment. Weak-looking wooden panels were nailed to windows and doors, preventing anyone from getting inside. Why would anyone bring kids to play here? This place had turned into a dump. Just 10 years ago, this was a vibrant and happy place for me. It's crazy how quickly some things can change without you noticing. I'm not sure if it was drunken bravery that led me to do my next action or what, but I decided it was a good idea to try entering the school. Part of me wanted to do it to find the girl, to see where she went, and the other part of me wanted to see my old school once more. I approached one of the boarded up windows and started tugging on it. It came off way easier than I was expecting it to. I guess in a town full of old people, they weren't expecting anyone to break in. I set the board down in the snow and I looked inside. I couldn't see a thing. It was still darker in there than it was out here. Still, I decided to climb inside. The first thing I noticed when I got inside was the smell. I knew it wasn't going to smell weird or good prior to entering, but this was an entirely different smell than what I was expecting. I was expecting the usual old smell abandoned buildings get, or the smell your grandmother's attic would get, but no, it wasn't that at all. Whatever the smell was in here, I've never smelled anything more awful in my life. It smelled like a decaying animal in here, but somehow worse. What could be producing this horrible smell? I tried ignoring it and continued onwards using the flashlight on my phone as a source for light. I had first entered in through a classroom window. I walked into the hallway and looked around, and the place wasn't familiar at all. It hadn't changed so much. Everywhere I looked was empty. Paint was peeling off of the walls, there were cracks in some floor tiles, and some of the doors were ripped off their hinges. There was no sign of the little girl anywhere. I even stood still for a moment to listen, but I heard nothing. It was almost too silent. I wouldn't have been able to hear someone drop a pin from the outside of the building. The decaying animal smell persisted throughout the entire school, and the smell itself almost convinced me to leave. As I stubbornly ventured through the hallways some more, I started having odd flashbacks. I don't know how to explain it. It was like daydreaming, but very vividly. The first flashback was a memory of mine when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I was in the same spot in the school I was currently standing at, right in front of Mrs. Gray's art room. I was walking down the hall with my buddy, Zach. We talked about all the stuff we were going to get up to after school. "Can we go to your house to play video games?" I asked. "Why mine? We always go to my house," he whined. "Because you have all the new games. Mom doesn't buy me any games." Good point," Zach said. The flashback concluded, and I smiled for a moment. Quickly, another flashback ensued. This time it was yet another memory, at the same time in my life, when I was a child. This time I was playing Manhunt with Zach and some of my other friends. I found the best hiding spot. It was a bunch of bushes. I remember laughing to myself, feeling superior that Zach would never think to find me here. Everything was going perfectly, according to plan, and then I heard a booming voice behind me. "Get out of that bush, Jordan. You'll hurt yourself." I turned around to see Mrs. Gray standing over me, her thin arms crossed, looking unimpressed. She was a very horribly looking old woman, bony, gray, balding hair, and a terribly wrinkly and wartly face. I quickly scurried out of the bush, to which Zach conveniently turned the corner of the building at the exact moment to find me. "Found you! Ha ha!" Then another flashback hit me immediately after the one ended, but this time, it wasn't my memory. I was standing out of the principal's office. He was furious with me. He scolded me for trespassing. All I could do as a kid was just stand there and cry. But this wasn't right. In my entire time of attending OES, I never once got enough trouble to be sent to the principal's office. And I've never trespassed in my life. Well, until now. In the flashback, Mrs. Gray stood over me and watched with a stern look on her face as I was yelled at by the principal. Then another flashback hit me, and once again, it wasn't my memory. School was on fire. OES had never caught fire before. Why was I getting this memory? Kids screamed as the building was engulfed in flames. Some were still in there. I was standing across the street, Mrs. Gray standing next to me with her arms crossed the entire time. Then another false memory. This time it was the worst one yet. I was sitting at my desk, alone in the classroom with only Mrs. Gray. She towered over me. She looked down at me and simply said, "Zach is dead." She repeated herself, then again, and kept on saying it until I was forced to cover my ears. I kept getting hit with one flashback after another, all memories as a kid that I myself didn't remember. They got worse and worse, more sadistic with each new flashback, until I got to the final one. I was in the playground, playing catch with some friends. The ball bounced onto the road, and without thinking, I ran over to get it. I bent down in the middle of the road to pick it up, but when I turned, I saw Miss Gray standing an inch away from my face. She looked different. Her eyes were sunk, her pupils so small. They looked like tiny white little dots with dark circles for eyes. She was frowning, her arms crossed, but she didn't say a word. Then I heard a car horn behind me. I turned the other way and was hit by oncoming traffic. I then saw an image of my parents, my sister, mourning over my grave. I flashed back to reality and screamed. Falling backwards onto the ground, I looked around the dark hallways and instantly felt more uncomfortable than I already was. I needed to find a way out of here, so I got up and started looking the way I came from. I stopped dead in my tracks when I heard the sound of a voice echoing through the hallway, around the corner, except it didn't sound like a normal voice. It sounded like something otherworldly, trying to mimic a human. It was scratchy, hollow, and void of all emotion. "Jonathan," the voice said sternly. Chills flew up the back of my spine and my legs stopped working for a bit, freezing me into a standing position. It then called out again, this time it sounded closer. "Jonathan! Jonathan!" It continued to call out. I forced myself to investigate, which was the dumbest idea I've had in my entire life. I needed to know who was calling my name, who would be calling me, that even knew my name. As I slowly peeked out around the corner, I shone my flashlight, and at the end of the hallway, I saw an older lady, standing at the end of it, blocking the exit doors. It was difficult to see the details. It was too dark, and she was far too far away from my flashlight to fully illuminate anything. However, from her stern demeanor, the way her arms were crossed, I knew who it was. Mrs. Gray. I just stood there and stared at her in disbelief. "Jonathan, get back here now!" she demanded. I didn't react. My flight mode was completely shattered, and I stood there in fear. I wasn't even sure how to react. Mrs. Gray then knelt down, placing her hands on the floor. Then she started sprinting on all fours at me. Her speed wasn't human. Nobody can run that fast, let alone on all fours. This was the speed of an animal, and it was coming straight for me. Luckily, my flight instinct kicked in, and I started sprinting down the hallway around the corner. I could hear the pitter-patter of her running getting louder and louder, and I knew she was going to outrun me easily. I had no time to look for the way that came in, so I ran straight for the other exit doors at the end of the hallway. Mrs. Gray got close enough for me to hear her panting like a dog, but I reached the exit doors before she could get me, and I slammed all of my body weight into them. If the doors didn't hold, I'd be dead, but if they did, I may have a chance. I'd like to think that I had God on my side that night, because the boards broke apart and the door collapsed as soon as I hit it. I fell into the snow from outside. The snowstorm was still going on, and it felt colder than it was earlier. I got up quickly and made the mistake of looking behind me. What I saw approaching me from the hallways wasn't Mrs. Gray anymore. The creature was huge, but thin. It was on all fours with stick-thin legs, its back touching the ceiling. It was completely naked, no hair, nothing, with gray skin. Its face was the most horrifying part. It had no eyes, just dark hollows where its eyes should have been, and its mouth was gaped open so wide, it probably could have swallowed me whole if it wanted to, and I think it wanted to. "Jonathan!" echoed out of its gaping mouth, but it no longer sounded anything close to human. I barely even recognized that it was saying my name. I turned back towards the street and started running as fast as I could, the tall snow from the snowstorm still slowing me down. I felt the creature crunching through the snow right behind me, and it got so close I felt hopeless. There was no way I was outrunning it any longer. When I made it to the street, I turned one last time to see it at the edge of the property. It stopped. Whatever that thing was, it wouldn't leave the school grounds. I felt lights hit my face. I turned to the right to see car headlights. Then everything went black. While I was blacked out, I had an odd dream. I dreamt of a school playground, but everything was completely silent. A group of unfamiliar kids danced around in a circle. The sun shone brightly, making the entire scene look nice and warm. Long, bony arms emerged from behind them, and they wrapped themselves around the children as if to shield them from any harm, or to hide them. The kids continued dancing as if they didn't notice the arms. Then it ended as soon as I woke in the hospital room. My family and friends in the university, including some of my high school friends like Zach, were all standing by my bedside. As soon as I opened my eyes, a look of relief instantly washed over my mother's face. She rushed over and hugged me, and I hugged her back tightly. My mother took a step back, and I looked down to see my right leg was wrapped in a cast and being supported by a pillow underneath it. I also had a cast on my right arm. "How you feeling, son?" my father asked. Considering the circumstances. Great, I joked. I got a few smiles from everyone. Do you remember what happened last night? No, I lied. Seems like your car broke down. You must have gotten out to look for help. That's when a car that didn't see you in the snowstorm hit you. They felt awful about it, and they drove you to this hospital. You've been out for an entire day. We've been worried. Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. You only broke your leg, your arm, a few ribs, Zach said. I was afraid you'd get paralyzed. I don't think I'm paralyzed, I joked, raising my good arm to flip him off. We're just happy you're all okay, my mother said. Yeah, with this kind of reckless behavior, Mrs. Gray would have gotten quite mad with me, I said. Who's Mrs. Gray? Zach asked. You know, the old bitchy teacher we had back at OES, I said. Do any of you guys remember Mrs. Gray? Zach asked. I had their high school friends in the room. They all shook their heads. Maybe you hit your head a little too hard in that accident, Zach joked. A few more days passed, and it was time to go back to the university. My mom was worried about me returning as a cripple, but I proved to be quite efficient around the house with my crutches. I wouldn't be able to drive, obviously, but my dad generously offered to drive me the entire 4-hour drive. I loaded all my stuff into the trunk with my parents' and my sister's help, said my goodbyes to my mother and Melanie, and got into the car with my dad. We drove through Orford, and when we passed the school, I tried to look away, but my dad spoke up. Hey, look, there's some kids out in the area just like you said. That's odd. I looked out my window to see all the kids lined up by the road, waving slowly at us passing by. At the end of the line, Mrs. Gray was standing there, waving as well. My dad waved and smiled as I quickly looked down at my lap. I didn't speak the rest of the ride. My dad understood, since he just seemed as probably bummed for getting hit by a car and everything. The entire time, I just couldn't think about the whole situation. If Mrs. Gray wasn't real, then why do I remember her from my childhood so vividly? What did she even want from me? I think it's safe to assume Mrs. Gray isn't anything from our world. She isn't anything somebody can comprehend. We even call that thing a she. I could barely comprehend what happened to me that night. I don't expect anyone else to. I'm only writing this because I want to keep my thoughts straight, and maybe someone out there had a similar experience. I hope I can soon move past this and live a normal life. But there's one thing for sure. I will avoid Orford Elementary School, and I avoid everyone else do the same. Something evil lives in that abandoned school.